Everyone, Mike Gillette here, and I have a question for you, if you are a man. And that question is, what is your job as a man? What is your job as a man? And the reason I ask that question is because I had never really thought about that question until this very day, 30 years ago. Today is the 30th birthday of my son, Steve. We have 4 children, but just one son amongst the 4. And when he was born, that was the first time I really started mentally exploring just what it meant to be a man. And I believe in asking questions. When I got involved in the training game many years ago, I started training police officers. So I would start with a class and say, what is your job as a police officer? And we would just sort of steer that until it moved towards the topic that I was going to speak on. When I talk to athletes, I will say, what is your job as an athlete? You know, what are you expected to do? What do you expect you to do? And so on. I think establishing context is very helpful. So, what is your job as a man? Now, when I first began my road in parenthood, our first was a girl. And I didn't think that much of parenting with respect to its complexity or what it meant to be a man, because I assumed that my job in taking care of a girl was simply to protect that girl. Now, she was born when I was still a soldier, and I think I sort of saw those roles more or less as variations of the same theme. I protected my country. I could protect this baby. How simple could things be? Now, granted, I was young and had yet to be subject to real parental trials. But it wasn't until my son was born that I really started to look at parenting through the prism again of manhood and what it means to be a man. And to be clear, I don't purport to be a social scientist. I'm not looking at manhood or gender roles through the lexicon of the latest terms and sort of evolving definitions of what some people might mean by that. I'm a pretty black and white guy with respect to my idea of manhood for myself. You are free to explore manhood however you choose to. We can still be friends and hang out. So for me, and for you, if you sincerely entertain this question, it's an important question, because as a father of a boy, I had to really examine what it was that I was to do. You know, yes, I had to take care of this child, you know, along with my wife. You know, we had to raise and nurture this child. But also, too, I had to contend with the fact that everything I did was being closely paid attention to. And I knew that to be the case because my own experiences growing up were all about paying very close attention to the male role models in my life. Sadly, in my case, my father was not someone who I spent much time around. I saw him twice a year because my parents were divorced when I was quite young. The man that I spent the most time around growing up was a horrible person. And I've written at length about those years. They were very harrowing. He was very violent. There was much substance abuse. So my early model of manhood, of masculinity was deeply flawed and deeply incorrect. So having not much of a day-to-day model of my own to draw upon, I had to really think about the implications of my role as a man, as a father, you know, with some real seriousness. And I did, you know, in the context of, you know, a lot of those years are far behind me, and I was young when I started out. But the one thing that I really tried to do with respect to taking that seriously was understand that those young male eyes were always going to be on me, and they were always going to be evaluating me. And of course, it was easy in the very early days, because in the very early days I enjoyed that period that I think most fathers enjoy, which is they're more or less kind of an idealized model of manhood. You know, when you're a young father, your young son has a tendency to emulate everything you do and think it's all just wonderful. And that is a heady time, and it can also fill you with false expectations for how things are going to be in the coming years. Because eventually this young man is going to be less interested in being a carbon copy of you, which in my case is good. There only one Mike Gillette in this world is necessary. Thank you very much. But as my son became more interested in figuring out who he was, you know, invariably the emulation phase and the sort of hero phase, that gives way to other phases. And in the case of my son, we occasionally had conversations where I said, there will be times when I disappoint you. I will let you down. You will be frustrated by how I treat you versus how I treat your sisters. It won't be exactly the same. I try to be consistent, but you're all different people. And because you're different people, I will treat you differently. So expect that, and expect to be frustrated by that. I tried to be as upfront as I could with the various areas of my own life that might appear less than heroic, less than amazing. And I think that's important. But nonetheless, despite our inherent humanness and despite our own inherent limitations, we are still very much role models, all of us. And that is something that I always tried to keep in mind, and that is something I always tried to honor. And I did my best to sort of live up to that aspect of fatherhood, of being a role model. Even when I knew that the things I was modeling were not necessarily being closely adhered to, or maybe even particularly valued. Because I believed that there would come a time when we would probably meet around the future bend, and he will have been paying attention on some level, and that consistency will have been very important for him in sort of establishing that baseline from which he would have the ability to sort of, spring forth and explore himself, so to speak. So here we are in the present day, 2018. I have a 30-year-old son of whom I'm extremely proud. And is he a carbon copy of Mike Gillette? Thankfully, no. He's very much his own man who has pursued his own passions and explored his own talents. Unlike me, he's extraordinarily creative, works as a freelance graphic artist, and has taught himself parallel skills, music production, video production, and he sort of combines all of his abilities in visual and audio arts, and is able to make a living on his own while supporting his wife and his own 2 sons. And having opportunities to see my own son be a father to his sons is, well, it's complicated to describe. It's amazing, it's inexplicable, but mostly just amazing. And it's in those moments where you can see how sort of the values transference process of fatherhood and being a man can be made real. And I hope that in your walk, whether you're a parent or not, if you're a man or not, the one thing that is true of all of us is we all get to be role models, whether we realize it or not, and whether we want to or not. So if you can get comfortable with that, I think you can start to answer your question, for you who are men, what does it mean to be a man? What is your job as a man? To be the best role model that you can be.